We're continuing with our North Shore series. In this series, we're visiting various communities along the North Shore, and this is Gloucester. And I'm doing this exercise to give some points as to how you might approach a busy area, in particular the background. And it's a challenge when we're working outside to make the background work as a background and work to let us see and enjoy the major subject. And I did a little tonal study to get started. This is just a breakdown of what I consider to be the foreground, the main stage where the fishermen are standing and seated, and then the background. And if you notice it, if we look at the left side, it looks very busy, and it resembles the busyness of the scene that we saw. But in fact, it was painted very without much attention to the details that were there. And this is going to be basically a two-color painting using burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. This helps me to avoid getting too caught up in matching color and making the color represent the objects that I'm painting. This helps me to think about my subject in terms of lights and darks, and also cool areas and warm areas. If you look at the sky, I started with a very pale burnt sienna. On top of that, I added a little stronger cobalt blue. And then I'm doing the same in reverse as I build the foreground or the water area. These are both good examples of a graded wash in the sky and in the water. Along the way, I'm leaving some whites, you'll notice. This is, for me, a really important strategy to start to think about rooftops and edges that might be facing the sun. So as I'm building these lighter washes, I'm aware of that and letting my brush skip along and leave some of those. And now I'm starting with the background. I mixed the colors this time on the palette. I mixed a gray out of burnt sienna and cobalt blue. And I'm using that gray to paint the background and really paint it as one shape. Of course, I'm leaving those whites that registered in the beginning, but I'm really thinking about this, and I guess that's the important phrase, is your working thought. My working thought is to make this one shape, and if my brush skips a little bit, I leave it. I try to join the trees with the buildings, with the boats, and I even extend that idea, this gray, into the sky in terms of masts or wires or antenna or building tops, all this stuff that drives us crazy when we're looking at it. How do we possibly paint this? I'm painting it pretty much as one shape, and it's a strategy that works in a lot of scenarios. We can't always use it, but that's what this particular demonstration is about. So the background, in my estimation, is going to have some things, small things added, or at least connections made. But now I'm very much starting with the midground, and you notice the big change to the tonality. Same two colors, burnt sienna, cobalt blue. Here I'm mixing them more on the page. In fact, sometimes I'll even put the two colors on my brush at once and paint an object, knowing that it's going to leave more sienna here, more cobalt there. And I don't try to adjust it after that. But I'm working with thicker paint, knowing that it's going to give me a darker value, knowing that it's going to push back that whole background that we just painted. And it's already having that effect. You can see that the background is receding. It's starting to feel humid or misty out. So this is, I think, for working with a complex area, a complex motif, I should say, starting to think of the background almost as one shape. And very much I'm thinking of the midground as one shape too, because I'm joining all of these parts, the pier, the bullocks, the fishermen, the canopy overhead, the sense of boats, the sense of rooftops. All that's being joined now with this stronger value. And of course, I'm placing this stronger value on probably my lightest value in the painting, which is the water as it comes towards us. And I'm putting the figures right on top of that because I want them to be very visible. I want to understand what they're doing, how they relate to the area around them. I want to understand that on one glance. And so I feel I need to see them against that light area. And I'm painting them pretty much as a silhouetted shape, still using the two colors and mixing on the page. The two colors, burnt sienna, cobalt blue. Very much a exercise. But the finished painting will show us a few things about working with complex areas and reducing them to flatter shapes that, as we work with watercolor, they tend to get the dimension that we want, but very much the mindset is that of a kind of flat shape with some color variation. I'm extending the darks that I placed into the figures and into the bullocks and pier, now into the left-hand side, joining it, strengthening some of the details so that we feel we're looking through this area, leaving some of those whites because those break up the dark and they refer to the overhead light. And I'll even carry some of those darker masks, those darker touches into the background and into the masts behind the rooftop there. So you can see how this flows from back to front, but in stages, and adjusting the paint consistency along the way. Still two colors of cobalt blue. Here we're mixing them right on the paper. Cobalt blue, burnt sienna, and occasionally a hint of the neutral tint to give us one more darkness, or to gray the brighter color even more. And this left-hand shape is actually a boat. It looks like just a big glom right now, but if I got too much detail in this lower left-hand corner, it would detract from the main figures. It would cause some visual confusion, which we want to avoid, and it wouldn't benefit the painting. So I'm being very abstract with the patterns in the background, with the patterns through the midground, and with this large boat. Even though it's near to us, I'm avoiding too much detail. Now I'm extending that dark into the reflections of the three figures. And there they are. One is fishing, one is drinking a beer, the other's kind of holding a beer and leaning on the post. It must be that time of day when they've come in. They've unloaded the boat. They're fishing a little bit, having a beer. It's the end of the day, and they're enjoying themselves. And this was all inspired. This idea came from that busy scene. In fact, I saw the figure sitting on the scene, and that's the part of that complex area that first attracted me, was seeing that figure. I wanted to use this motif as a way to show how to handle a complex background and really reduce it to a few recognizable shapes, but in essence, a lot of shapes were blended. And that's the exercise.